Hello, everyone, and welcome to Boston Balling. I'm your host, Gabby Hurlbut. There's a lot going on right now. Busy time for sports. NHL, draft just happened, free agency, NBA draft, MLB trade deadline. So there's a lot going on in the sports world right now. It's a little crazy, but I hope everybody is having a good week and is doing well. And I'm excited to bring you guys another episode. There's definitely a lot to talk about. I'm excited to introduce my guest that I have with me for this episode. He's very talented, does a lot of hockey coverage, writes for NESN, hosts of NESN Bruins podcast. So definitely a really, really talented guy, knows his stuff. So Logan, how are you doing today?
Doing good, thanks. Thanks for having me, Gabby.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for coming on the show. I really enjoy your content on social media. So you do a really good job. So I'm looking forward to having you.
Yeah, thank you.
So before we kind of get started, talking a lot of hockey, could you just give us a little brief overview about how you got involved in working in sports and just your role at NESN?
Yeah, so I've been at NESN since November of 2017. I hadn't worked there before. It just kind of fell into a job about, 6 months after I graduated from college. And, if anybody who reads NESN.com knows that we do a little bit of everything. So it's pretty seasonal for me, but whenever hockey's going on, whenever there's hockey news, hockey games, whatever, that's kind of my wheelhouse, if you will. So a lot of hockey stuff for me. The last 2 years basically have been nonstop just because the schedule's gotten all thrown off with shutdowns and whatnot. So if there's hockey stuff to be done, I'm usually among the people that takes care of it. That's a pretty straightforward assessment of what I do.
Yeah, that sounds pretty fun. Yeah, that's cool. And then the NESN Bruins podcast that you do, how long has that been around?
So that predated me, but I became a part of it that was before the 2018 season. And that was me and Mike Cole. And then Mike Cole went on paternity leave in January. So Lauren Campbell joined. And so it was me and Lauren for a little bit. And then when Mike came back, it stayed the three of us. So we're going on 3 years now, but it's now me, Mike, and Lauren.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I know Lauren. I actually had her on the show at one point too. Definitely super talented as well.
Yeah.
But that's awesome. It sounds like you love what you do too. And who wouldn't want to cover your favorite teams every day, Yeah,
it's not a bad way to pass the days by.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And did you grow up in the Boston area too?
I did not actually. I grew up right outside of Houston, Texas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my mother's from Connecticut and my father's from New Hampshire. So I grew up periodically coming up to New England, but I am actually from right outside of Texas. I didn't start living here full time until I moved up for college, where I went to Springfield College in Western Massachusetts.
Okay, yeah, I got you. Yeah, I'm from Connecticut, pretty close to the Springfield area too. So nice. I know that area.
Where in Connecticut are you? Where in Connecticut?
I live well, right now I live a little past Hartford, near Waterbury.
Okay.
But I grew up really close to UConn, the UConn campus.
Oh, really? So I live in Vernon, Connecticut, actually.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I grew up in Tolland.
Okay. Yeah. I'm right outside of Hartford too.
So that's really funny. What a coincidence that is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome though. That's pretty cool. But yeah, that's really great. And you're definitely good at what you do. So definitely just keep working hard.
Thank you. I will.
But yeah, like I kind of mentioned at the beginning of the show, there's a lot going on right now with hockey and with the Bruins. I think, I kind of want to just start off on getting your opinion on how the season went as a whole this year. Because, there was definitely some frustration, I think, and it was just a weird season overall. But I think this was a season that going into the playoffs, they looked like a team that really could compete. And I think things were starting to come together. But we once again saw what we're used to seeing, which is them falling short in the playoffs. So how do you think in general the season went as a whole this past year?
Considering who they lost to, I don't think it should be a complete failure. Like the Islanders were a tough team, and the Islanders gave the Lightning a hard time too. And obviously the Lightning were the eventual champions. So I guess you have to, it depends on where you value success. If it's squarely them winning the Stanley Cup, then obviously it's a failure. And I understand that and would agree on that front. But if you think about it from the standpoint of Charlie McAvoy taking a step forward, a free agent signing like Craig Smith working out, Brad Marchand continuing to play at a Hart Trophy level, things like that, then it's a plus. And people might disagree with this. I think it was a success in that you learned what you have a bit more with guys like Jeremy Lauzon, who obviously got taken in the expansion draft, like Jacob Zaboral, Trent Frederick, a few guys that were kind of on the precipice of becoming full-time NHL players, but we really had no idea what it was going to be like for them to play a full season in the NHL. So in a weird way, it was like a transition year. They were honestly better than I thought they would be. But I look at it as a season where they obviously did not reach the end goal. Neither do 31 other teams. But there were some positives to take away, I guess, to put a spin on it.
Yeah, I mean, and this season was kind of supposed to be a transition season going into it as it is, because there were a lot of question marks anyway. So we didn't really know how this team was going to perform. So I do think that they exceeded some of the expectations that they had going into the season. Because going into the season, I think people's expectations they weren't really sure of, because they knew that this season was just going to be likely a transition year, but they actually ended up performing pretty well.
It was weird. And I'm of the mindset that this past season and basically last postseason shouldn't be a litmus test for how good or bad any team is, because of all the ancillary things, like the very unusual circumstances. Guys that had down years might not necessarily have had them in a more normal circumstance. Like that's why I give a guy like Jake DeBrusk a bit more of a pass for how he played. So yeah, because of the state that the Bruins were in, where they had lost somebody like Zdeno Chara, they had guys like Tuukka Rask and David Krejci going into contract years. Like there was a lot of transition, but there's also a certain level of, it was such a bizarre year that I'm hesitant to make any sort of sweeping judgments about any team, not just the Bruins from the last, was it now like 7 or 8 months?
Yeah, I agree with that too. I mean, it's just hard to gauge teams based on a weird season like that. And that's why I'm looking forward to going back to a regular season with the regular format. And even, the division thing, just the twist up of divisions and just playing those same few teams all season. It's just really hard to gauge how that would have translated to an actual normal NHL season.
Yeah. And again, I think it was just a lot of teams just trying to kind of grind it out through this season. I did kind of like seeing the same teams over and over again until they had like 6 games in 2 weeks against the Sabres. But
yeah, I know, because they say it seemed like all of those matchups were saved for later on in the season, because they didn't even really see the Sabres at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, they were the last team I think that they saw. And then they had the COVID postponements too from the outbreak. So then it got really backloaded with games against the Sabres. So that was a little disenchanting, I guess. Yeah, I know, exactly. And I mean, yeah, I feel like from a competitiveness standpoint, it was kind of cool playing those same teams, especially when, they were having challenges against that Islanders team at the beginning of the season too. And then, after the trade deadline, they started to figure things out against them. And although that was frustrating, it just created more excitement for when you were playing them, because it was like, oh, I wonder if they'll turn things around this game, because they seem to just struggle against the Islanders. So from that aspect, it was actually kind of cool seeing the same teams for the whole regular season. Yeah, and they were in a tough division too. And
yeah,
it was tough not seeing them play like the Maple Leafs or the Canadiens, like teams that I enjoy watching them play. But I've always liked watching the Rangers play. The Islanders didn't do a whole lot for me. Obviously, the Sabres are a bit of a downer. The Devils were the same thing too. But seeing the Capitals over and over, like the Penguins, there were some interesting matchups. So I'm glad that it's going back to normal, but I didn't dislike it as much as I think some people did.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I didn't dislike it at all, really. I thought I would before the season started going into it and we found out what that format was going to be. I thought I wasn't going to like it because in my head I was kind of like, oh, this could get old seeing the same
Yeah,
teams over and over and it could get really boring just watching them play these same teams. But it actually really didn't for me. I actually didn't find it to be that much of an issue for me, but from a standpoint of it was weird for sure. And just the format in general, I think it's just hard to gauge how teams would have been had it been a regular set up NHL season, I should say.
For sure. I mean, there were teams in I forget what they called it, basically the Pacific or like the West Coast one, that there are a lot of soft matchups because of the Ducks and the Sharks and the Kings were all not in a position to compete. And then you have the Bruins where basically the only teams that like didn't belong were the Sabres and to a lesser degree the Devils. And so it was basically a matter of the draw that you got in terms of division.
Exactly, yeah, and they just happened to be in a good one, which made it more fun for us, I think, to watch. And I mean, a lot of those teams are going to be intriguing to watch in the future too, because I think the Rangers are a team that future-wise is going to be really good. I think they're on the right path towards success in the next few years.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by their roster building. I feel like I really like the direction they were going into. They've made a few suspect decisions. Yeah. I guess I don't understand the Barclay Goodrow contract.
Yeah, that's a little confusing to me too.
Things like that. Like those are the types of deals that you hitch your wagon to now and you think, okay, this might help. And then a year or two down the road, you're basically just eating all that money. So I hope that their complete overhaul of management and coaching doesn't completely railroad what they've been doing. But I agree that like in terms of the younger talent and then also the free agents that they've brought in, like Artemi Panarin, like they have been going on the right track.
Yeah, for sure. And I look at it as, the fact that the Bruins, they had some young players this year and it was like we talked about with it, people expecting it to be a transition year. They were able to compete in that division with that. So that's actually pretty impressive that they were able to compete with a tough division like that in a season that we didn't really know how it was going to go. And I think from that perspective, that's a positive you can take away from it too. And I think when you look at the playoffs, even if they had gotten past the Islanders, I think Tampa would have been extremely hard because Tampa was just on fire once again. And they were just looking like a really, really good team. And they really were actually looking like the favorite once again from what I was seeing. And so I think even if the Bruins had gotten past the Islanders, I think the Lightning still would have been a tough matchup regardless.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw that last year too, or previous season, however you want to frame it, in 2020, that, for whatever reason, the Bruins just aren't really built to compete against the Lightning. And that's, criticism of their 2019 run too, is that they didn't, the Blue Jackets bailed them out so they didn't have to play the Lightning. But
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, it looks like this year they're insistent on adding size. That might help, but the Lightning are just such a deep team too. Like, I don't even think it's an indictment of the Bruins. Like, a lot of teams just can't hang with the Lightning as they were constructed last year. Now they're paying the piper for that. They're basically having a fire sale. So things might be different going forward now, but the way the Lightning have been built the last 2 or 3 years, it just was not great for the Bruins from a matchup standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, it is a big depth thing that the Lightning just really, really have a deep team and a lot of options that a lot of other teams can't really say. And I think they've worked to really build their team into that. And that helps them win the cup the last 2 years. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they do when it goes back to a normal NHL season too. And just see if they still have it or if they are going to just be in the mix with everybody else. Because so far they've won the cup in 2 seasons that were a little bit different. So I'd be curious to see how they correlate to the regular NHL format as well.
Yeah, and I mean, they're going to be in last year, their division, I think they were in the Central, was tough. I mean, they had to play the Hurricanes a lot. They had to play the Panthers a lot. This year, though, it's a little different. Like, they still get the Panthers, but they're going to have the Bruins more. They're going to have the Canadiens. so I don't know. The point is well taken on it. Has just been two very unusual seasons, and they have had a very unique salary cap circumstance. I honestly don't know how good they're going to be without. I mean, they lost their entire third line: Barclay Goodrow, Yanni Gordon, Blake Coleman, all gone. There's still uncertainty around how healthy guys like Hedman and Kucherov and Stamkos are all going to be. So I don't expect them to completely flame out, but I don't think they're going to be as good as they have been the last couple of years for myriad reasons.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I don't think they're going to be super dominant like they were. I think they could still be a good team and compete with other teams. I just don't think they're going to be just as dominant as they have been, and just that team that you look at and it's like, yeah, this is a clear favorite to go to the Stanley Cup. I don't think it's going to be like that. I think there's going to be other teams that can give them a run for their money more this season.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, but I mean, there's been a lot that's gone on already so far since the season ended. I mean, the draft is a big thing that took place already. How do you think that the Bruins drafted as a whole? I know I've seen a lot of mixed opinions on kind of the players that they did draft. But I'm just curious on your thoughts as to a lot of those players that they took, maybe even in the earlier rounds, especially, and just how you think that they did overall.
Well, what I liked about their approach is that they drafted guys with higher ceilings. I think, I liked the Fabian Lysell pick a lot. A lot of very smart people who watch prospects more than I do said he could have been a top 10 pick in terms of pure skill. Picking, I mean, the last few years they've gotten, Charlie McAvoy in the first round, but Johnny Beecher probably projects to be a high-end bottom six forward. Trent Frederick, it's the same thing. We're still kind of figuring out what Euro Vakanainen is going to be in the NHL. So, when they've kind of reached a bit on a pick and gone with somebody like David Pastrnak, it's panned out. So I have no issue with them breaking from the general mold of making safe first round picks, because eventually you have to start swinging for the fences a little bit. And I think in the NHL and in Major League Baseball, I'm a firm believer that you just draft the best player available. And if you have to, add to your goalie pipeline like they did in the fourth round, I believe it was, then that's one thing. But otherwise, I would not be drafting right now based on what the NHL roster currently needs. And I think sometimes they have a tendency, whether it's on purpose or not, to do that. Yeah. And, Lysell doesn't necessarily address an immediate need, but he was unequivocally the best player available, and he fell to them. And I think it was a similar thing with Brett Harrison, the kid that they got in the third round, that sometimes you just have to go with the best player instead of thinking, I'm going to stockpile my goalie pipeline or my defensive pipeline. And so I have very few qualms with what they did. It's a crapshoot anyways, right? Drafting's a very unscientific process.
Yeah, it is. It's true. It really is true.
They're all 18 years old. You don't know what a lot of them are going to turn into in the next few years.
Yeah, and they might not all pan out anyway as it is. So it's not like it's really hard to go into a draft and be like, oh, we want to pick this kid because he's definitely going to be the future of our team. You don't know. There's a lot of different circumstances. So there's no real way to go about it in particular, Yeah,
unless it's a top 5 pick, then for the most part, especially with a team like the Bruins that are competing now, you generally won't see those guys for at least 2 years. I think Charlie McAvoy kind of hosed a lot of the future prospects, because I think a lot of people think, well, Charlie McAvoy was 19 when he broke into the NHL and his first game was a playoff game. All that stuff. That is not how it works for the lion's share of not just prospects, but first round picks too.
Yeah, and exactly. I do agree with you there too. I think overall they did a pretty good job. And I think, the fact that Lysell fell to them, how do you not take somebody like that when you have the opportunity to? And it's even though, it doesn't direct an immediate need of this team, there seems to be a lot of upside with him. And talent-wise, he seems like somebody that, regardless, he can contribute down the road to this team. So how do you pass up on somebody like that because you're focusing on an immediate need when the player probably won't even play for a couple of years as it is? So I think they took the right approach there in taking him when they did, because he was going to go early as it is. And if he fell past them, he would have likely gone to maybe the next team or the team after that as it is, because of his talent. So how do you pass up on somebody like that? Because by the time he's able to actually play, I'm sure there's going to be a need for how he can contribute as it is anyway.
Yeah. And, if he does pan out to be a bona fide top, 15 player from this draft class, like, you find room for those guys.
Exactly. You make it work. Like, you find room on your active roster for him.
Yeah. So that's why I'm a huge proponent. Just take the best player.
And Harrison was a steal too, because he was somebody that they were saying could have been drafted a lot earlier as well. And so the fact that he fell and they were able to snag him in the 3rd round, I think, was good too.
Yeah, the big criticism with him is his skating, and that's another thing that I don't generally hold against younger players, because, if you're playing in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League or the OHL or something like that, like, you do get a good understanding of how to improve your skating. But at the same time, like, I don't know, they're still young, and skating is something that you can kind of rectify, and there are workarounds with it where you still have to be a decent enough skater. But like a good example is Tomáš Nosek, who the Bruins just signed. Like, he's not a great skater. He's a big guy. He doesn't move all that great. But as Don Sweeney said the other day, like, he gets there on time. Like, if you're an intelligent player, which by all accounts Brett Harrison is, then they figure out a way to overcome that. So you look, does he have the raw skills of a guy that would be a 2nd or 3rd round pick? And Brett Harrison does. So I think you take the flyer there and then hope that you can help him improve his skating, or at least find a way to sort of work around that.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things with all of this, is that these kids are young, and a lot of these skills are just things that are going to take time to help them develop. And that's obviously that's something to keep an eye on, but I also think it's something that they can easily work with him on, and that he can improve over the next, year or so. And then hopefully by that time it will have gotten better and he will have improved in that area. And so that's one of those things that I'm not majorly concerned about, because I do think it's something that can just be worked on and that he can improve, and then he should be good. It's one of those types of scenarios, I think.
Yeah, it all takes time. So you're just looking for the raw skills with a kid that age.
Exactly. Yeah. Because what else can you possibly really be looking for? Because they're so young as it is, and you don't know how their skills are going to correlate to the NHL. You're just looking for somebody strictly that is talented, that you think has a lot of upside, that in the future can contribute to your team.
Precisely.
That's really all that it is.
Yeah.
But it's more, what's more important is everything else that they've done, is that they're trying to do in the offseason, free agency, and players that they're looking to make an immediate impact to direct those needs that we saw at the end of the season. And the players that they're bringing in to try to help solve some of those immediate issues now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the sort of conclusion that I've come to is that they realized they needed more size. And not necessarily, I think people conflate that with, guys who fight, which is not necessarily true. But like, Tomáš Nosek is a big guy. Derek Forwart's a big guy. Eric Howell is on the smaller side, but Nick Foligno, big guy, physical player. So I think I don't even think the Bruins really got bullied that much. I think what people believe I believe that people think they got bullied way more than they actually did, but they seem to believe that they needed to add more size, and they very obviously did that. Like, that was the first thing.
Yeah, that's what it seems like the theme was. That's what they were targeting based on that group of players when it was released, all the players that they were signing. Yeah. It seemed like that was kind of the pattern they were going for.
Yeah, and at a certain point, you have to ask, how much is size and physicality more important than skill? But I guess if you're okay with the top 6 having most of the skill, and I mean, your 4th line is generally more the grinders anyway, and then the 3rd line is generally a mixture of both. But I think that the conclusion I've come to is that they were basically just stockpiling guys, because they have a lot of variety now. Like, by my count yesterday, I think I came up with 16 players who will probably compete for a spot in the bottom 6. So I'm thinking between prospects and guys they've signed. So, that's 10 players who probably can play in the NHL that will not have a roster spot. So I think by doing that, it's allowing them to play with a little bit more variety, play to the matchups more often. If you're playing a team where you can get away with finesse and more skill, then you adjust your third line or maybe even your fourth accordingly. And if you play a team that's a little bit heavier, you play a Washington Capitals type or even the Islanders, as we've learned, then you go with a group that's a little bit more brawn.
Yeah, I think it's good that they are doing it that way, though, because it's good to have options now and be able to say we have a good variety of players here. Like we can stick this person here or this person here. And I think that was something that they didn't really have a lot of before this. And so I think that having that goal in mind of being able to just have a variety of players is really, really important because that's definitely going to help them going forward when you look at some of these other tough teams.
Well, the way their roster had been built was basically they had their core group of 12 forwards, and then basically they had two spares, which were a guy that can play center and then a prospect. Like last year it was Greg McKegg and to a degree Par Lindholm. The year before that was Par Lindholm. And then it's Carson Kuhlman or Jack Studnicka or Trent Frederick or somebody like that. So basically what would happen is that if they got into a tough spot and, multiple guys were going through cold patches or whatever, you're basically throwing in the Greg McKegg type who was a stopgap and then the Studnicka type who you hope is NHL ready, but if he's not, then he's kind of a non-factor at all. So I think what they're looking to do now is say, well, we might have to scratch maybe Eric Holla for all I know, or Chris Wagner or somebody like that on a given night. But it's because we have so many other options. And what that enables you to do is have a shorter leash with some guys. So Jake DeBrusk is probably a good example. He's going to have less leash than ever before just because of the season that he's coming off of, and the Bruins have other options.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that's going to be interesting to see how they handle all of that this season too. And I think being able to have that ability to have shorter leashes for some players is actually a good thing because that just shows that you have more options and that you don't need to, settle. But the other thing that I will point out that I'm actually really happy about is them extending Taylor Hall. I think that he actually, when he came here, I think he showed, he brought a lot, I think, that they needed, and he really contributed right when he got here. And I think that, as much as he was a little bit quiet in the postseason, I think that he is a key piece, and I'm happy that they brought him back because that was something that I was saying for a while was one of the first things I wanted to see them do was bring him back and because I think that he's a really important asset to the team now.
Yeah, and he solves an issue that they've had a problem with for a long time, which is a stable second line winger, left winger in particular, especially since Jake DeBrusk has flamed out lately. I think they got him for about what the going rate is for a player of his caliber now, probably less. Like he's only 3 years removed from winning a Hart Trophy. There's not a whole lot of former Hart Trophy winners that you can get for $6 million or less. So they might be paying a premium for a guy that's their second line winger, but at the same time, considering what his ceiling is and what he's capable of, I think it was pretty fair value. And he's someone that you don't generally have to worry about. And it seems like the fact that he doesn't have to be, quote unquote, the guy like he was periodically in Edmonton and the entire time in New Jersey and pretty much the entire time in Arizona as well, and Buffalo, obviously. Yeah. I think that takes a lot of pressure off of him. And it was evident that he was playing a bit more freely. And we noticed, too, that he became a much better defensive player, and it's because he didn't have to empty the tank every shift in the attacking zone. So I think that they're getting $6 million out for a far more well-rounded player than we might have seen in years past.
Yeah, and I think, I think there's a lot to be said for that, though. There's a lot to be said for somebody who's coming from other teams where a lot was reliant on him to him being more of a supportive type of player here because there are other players that can take on that role. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And like you said, I think that really shows because it almost came across like he was really comfortable out there. And I think it's because there was a lot less pressure on him on this Bruins team. And I think that's allowing him to be able to succeed more because he's used to coming from other teams where there's a lot on him and there's a lot more pressure. And I think it's a relief almost for him that he's not in that situation now and he can just do his thing and not have to be the one that everybody's relying on as much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think ultimately that is what it comes down to, is like he probably won't even, barring injuries, ever need to play a top line role. And that is a tremendous asset to have on your second line.
Yeah, because that top line is solid. It has been solid. And then there was just really nothing past that was a lot of the issue that they had. And so I think when I found out originally, like when the news first came out that they were trading for him and they did not really give up much at all for him, I was like, this is a good move. I was like, this is somebody that they actually really could utilize, that it can be a solid addition to that second line. And you don't have like, that's something that you don't have to worry about. And this is, a veteran that's been around a few different teams and somebody that can contribute from a leadership standpoint too, but doesn't have to be that one guy that all the pressure falls on. And so I think that we're seeing that. And I think them, bringing him back on a 4-year contract, I think that's good because I think this is a team that he can really, really continue to just grow. And I think he'll enjoy playing here because he's stated a few times that he would have liked to stay here and that he likes playing in Boston. And I think there's a lot to be said for that too, that, he likes being here. So I think that was a good move on their part. Yeah.
And a lot of guys have basically torpedoed all their contract leverage because they say that they like playing in Boston, but that's still, I think, a fair deal for Taylor Hall. And the term is good too. You're not hitching your wagon to a guy for 6, 7, 8 years that's already in his 30s. And it'll be a nice foray until what will probably be a new generation of Bruins players. So it's I liked the term a lot. I thought 4 years was perfect.
Yeah, me too. Because like you said, with the longevity, it would have been a risk to sign him for a few more years than that with his age. And I think I think that there's something to be said for the fact that they didn't commit to this crazy long-term contract with him because, again, he's on the older side. So you don't know how he's going to be 3-4 years down the road from now anyway. So I think that the way that they played it was a good idea.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But yeah, I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but just the fact that they have so many veteran players, and we know that the time is running out for some of those players. And so I think that that's why the whole championship thing it's tough, right? For people to see them fall short now because some of these players aren't going to be here anymore soon. And so I think that the idea of that window kind of closing is still very much there because you do have players now that, like you said, a new generation is going to come up very soon. And so I think that this really needs to be, you need to go for it all while you still have these guys. And I think that's the mindset that I'm looking at it now. When you look at this roster right now, while you still have these players that are nearing the end of their time here, I think you need to take advantage of that and just try to do what you can to go all the way and win a championship before you lose some of these players.
Yeah, I think that's why we probably saw a lot of those like 2-year deals in free agency right now. You sign guys for the next couple years, and then at that point you reassess where the window is, right? Do you have to do a full-fledged rebuild? Can you do the New York Rangers or like Pittsburgh Penguins type retool on the fly? That's a question they don't know the answer to right now. But I think once a lot of these contracts start to come up in the next year or two, they'll have a better idea of what they need to do.
Yeah, definitely. And then because you can kind of see where the roster stands at that point and reevaluate like, okay, so do we need to just kind of start from scratch and do a full-on rebuild, or can we just kind of start to work around some of these other players that we have? And I think that's going to become very, very prevalent after the next couple of years. And you just take a look at what your current roster looks like at that point and what you need to do to kind of get back on the right track. And whether that means just, you know, throw everything in the towel and start over and do a full rebuild. And if that's what it has to be, then that's what it has to be. But I think that that will become clear as we see over the next couple of years, as the next couple of years play out. I think it'll be really evident what they need to do.
Mm-hmm. Which is why I think they're playing a lot of their prospects now and trying to figure that out.
And I think that was good. I mean, they a lot of those young players saw playing time this past season even, and I think that that's good because you could see their potential and see what they can do and if they're part of the future of your franchise or not as well.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the other big thing too is the goaltender situation. I think that that's something that's we still need to keep an eye on. And, you know, they did sign a couple goaltenders, but do you think that, you know, how do you think that they handle that? Do you think they just have Swayman be the starting goaltender and then go from there? Or, you know, I mean, because the Rask situation is still a question mark too. How do you think they handle him? I mean, there's a lot that they can do and a lot of directions they can take with that.
Yeah, well, they certainly didn't pay Linus Ullmark, you know, $5 million a year for 4 years for him to just be like a backup. Now, the way I see it is they just spent the last few years paying basically like $9.5, $10 million for their goaltending situation. Jeremy Swayman makes less than $1 million. Ullmark's going to make $5 million. If Tuukka Rask comes back, my guess is that he won't sign until January, and they'll just put him on a prorated deal for a couple million or something like that. So even if you have Tuukka Rask, Jeremy Swayman, and Linus Ullmark, then you're still most likely paying less than what you've been paying for your goalie situation the last 2 or 3 years. So Jeremy Swayman still is waivers exempt. So if Tuukka Rask comes back and is still capable of playing at a high level, then they do probably send Jeremy Swayman down to the AHL and let him play almost every night, unless he is playing so out of his mind that you just can't take the NHL job away from him. But I think a lot of teams, after seeing what happened with Carter Hart in Philadelphia, where he caught fire early on, and then the defense in front of him wasn't great, and he was getting exposed, and he was falling apart, and it just completely railroaded his confidence. I would be very surprised if the Bruins just let Jeremy Swayman like figure it out and take the Carter Hart approach of baptism by fire, especially if they have someone like Ullmark who can play on pretty much a nightly basis, and if the option exists for Tuukka Rask to come back.
Yeah, and I think that might have been a lot of the reason behind signing Ullmark anyway, because, you know, like we said, there were a lot of question marks with that. And I think now that you know you have somebody that's reliable, that can be kind of your everyday goaltender, you know, maybe the Jeremy Swayman experiment is you just see what he can do and then send him down to just continue to develop and just get more playing time. And then come, you know, a year or two, maybe when he's even better, bring him back up again. Because I think, I mean, I liked what I saw from him this season, but now that you have Ullmark that you signed, that you know kind of what you're getting from him, I think that that was kind of the big reason why they did that, because now you know that it's not just you have to rely on Swayman until the possibility of Tuukka Rask maybe coming back, and even if he does, maybe not having it, you know. So I think that you know now that you have that solid guy that you can kind of rely on, that you can throw in there.
Well, the Bruins still are firmly in win now mode, and it would be borderline irresponsible to just say Swayman is the guy and have a low end backup for him.
And that's the thing that I was saying to a lot of people too, was people were like, well, I think they should just roll with Swayman. But I was like, as much as I liked what I saw from Swayman this past season, because when he did play very well. But that's a huge risk for a team that's trying to win a championship. And it'd be one thing if this was a team that was in a rebuilding process and you wanted to start the season with him and just see what he can do, then that's a little bit different. But if you're a team like the Bruins that is really prioritizing winning now while they still have a lot of these veteran players, that's just a risky move for you to be doing. And so I'm kind of with you on that. That was the conversation I had with some of my friends, was like, you know, I don't really think that starting with Swayman and just trying to just make that work is the best idea for a team that's not in rebuild mode and just wants to do what they can to win. And now you don't you don't have to have that situation. But I know some people that were all for that. And I think it's because they liked, those short stints of what they saw from him this season.
Which is understandable, but at the same time, you have to think bigger picture too, where if you don't have a good security net and you're basically stuck with him being left to figure it out, like the sample size is very small. It's like 10 games. And so
yeah, exactly. It's not like he played the full season starting at goaltender. He came into some games and we saw him do some things, but it was like glimpses is how I would kind of describe it. Like it wasn't enough to say like, yeah, he's the guy. And maybe it's enough to say, yeah, like he should be the future of this team in that position. I think that's kind of a fair assumption pending, everything going well and him continuing to develop in the right direction. Then I think he could definitely be the future. But right now, I think there hasn't been enough time to say, yeah, he's the guy and you can rely on him every game to get the job done.
Yeah.
And I think obviously that comes with time, like he's still young too. And that's going to come with time. But I think now that you have that safety net secured, you have somebody that you can stick in any game and likely will be able to get the job done for you. And then when Rask comes back, then you evaluate where he's at and then you figure things out from there,
Yeah, young goalies are very fickle. It's a complete learning curve. And I think it helped that Swayman did face a lot of shots at Maine, similar to the way Linus Ullmark has faced a lot of shots with the Sabres. So there's something to be said about getting thrown right to the Wolves and being familiar with that kind of high danger stuff all of the time. But yeah, they needed a fallback plan because there's so much to be excited about with Jeremy Swayman that you don't want to run the risk of ruining it by completely killing his confidence or whatever the case might be by leaving yourself with no backup plan this year just because you got excited from a small sample size.
Definitely. I completely agree with that. And I'm glad that you're on the same page as me because I've had friends that have strongly disagreed with that and said like, no, like we know that he can do it. Like we know what he has. And I'm like, we just haven't seen enough from him yet to really be confident in that. And I'm like, I'm not saying he's not. I'm just saying, I think it's more fair to say in the future he could be, but I just haven't seen enough playing time from him yet to really feel confident that, yeah, he's the guy that we want to ride with, for this season and beyond. I just am not on that. I'm not on that train yet.
Yeah. I hate constantly beating this drum, but Carter Hart is the cautionary tale here.
Yeah, no, it's true though. That is definitely true. That's definitely a fair comparison. Mm-hmm. But yeah. And so, they went out, they signed these guys. They were aggressive that first day, right as free agency opened, they were aggressive and they started signing people, which is good. But do you think there's still more holes that they need to address, or do you think that overall they're pretty set right now?
I think that they could survive with the roster that they have. I don't think they signed so many left wingers without the intent of making some sort of move. They are probably done with free agents, if I had to venture a guess. I don't think they're done with trades.
So you don't see them signing any more free agents
I'd be very surprised. I mean, maybe depth pieces, but at this point, I don't know who they would find that fills a need that they could afford with the cap space that they have. So I think that they were stockpiling guys. And I wouldn't say that it's 100% that they make a trade, but I think they've positioned themselves to where they have enough resources and they have enough assets that they could flip in a trade to address, say, a top 4 defenseman or something like that, where they use some of their cap space, but they also, if they're moving money out, they can make things work. So I know a lot of people are getting hung up on they only have like $2 million in cap space. If they make a trade, there are enough deals that they could move off the books to get something done. Who that person is, I don't know in terms of who they would try and acquire or who's the best fit that might be on the trading block. But I think they've left themselves with room where if they go into this season with this group, they'll be fine with it. But they also have enough flexibility where they could make trades if they wanted.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised if we see 1 or 2 moves happen, but before the season starts, really, because I think, like you said, there's the possibility and the option to do it, and they have the flexibility to do it, which is big. But if they don't do it and we just start the season with the roster as is, I think they could get by with that. But it would be cool to see them try to work out a trade or two and just address some of the other areas.
Yeah, and they are finally working from abundance with at least their forward group. I think the biggest holes are on defense. I think that's the one where there could be a big upgrade. Like, I'm fine with the Derek Forbort signing, but I think that there's probably, the way I see it is that, a lot of those guys in the roles that they're in, Mike Riley in particular would probably be the best one. Mike Riley's okay as a second pairing defenseman. He'd be very good as a third pairing defenseman. Like, things look a lot different when you have Mike Riley and then like a Derek Forbort playing on his offside on the third pairing. And then it's Grzelcyk and McAvoy at the top and Brandon Carlo with somebody else you get from the outside. So I think, like, it's similar to the forward groups. Like, there's a way that they can enter the season and be okay, but it leaves them sort of with a very little room for error. And there could be ways that they could get more out of certain guys by just situationally.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I was going to say that actually about the defense, that I think defensively is the biggest area right now that I see that they would need to address, because, and we saw this in the postseason, they did have some defensive struggles, and I think defense was kind of the glaring weakness coming out of the playoffs this year. And I think that became evident the deeper they went into the playoffs, how they needed defensive help. And I think that's something that they still need to address. And I think maybe, they could make a move maybe for somebody like that. But I do think I am a little bit concerned still as it stands right now about the defense going into the season.
Yeah, I mean, I liked Zaboral, but I think that the problem that they run into is they're going to have a lot of puck-moving guys. But I don't know. That's why they signed Derek Forbort. Like, if you have a Grzelcyk, McAvoy, Riley, Carlo, Forbort, Clifton defense, that really is not the worst group. Like, that's probably middle of the road. It might not be the one that a legitimate Stanley Cup contender would have, but you still have one of the best puck carriers in the NHL, Matt Grzelcyk, on your top pairing. You have a guy that's about to be a perennial Norris candidate in Charlie McAvoy. Like, Mike Riley is coming off of a career year. So there are guys that would fit in well, I think, if the Bruins decided they wanted to make an addition. But I don't think that they're necessarily like forced to have to make a move. That said, I don't think they signed as many forwards as they did without the intent of possibly exploring trades.
Yeah, and that's kind of, what I in my head was thinking was like, oh, maybe they're signing some of these guys to give them more options to be able to look into trades, and now they have guys that they can kind of pair in, and it gives them more options to be able to make some moves if they wanted to. But I don't think they're pressing like, oh, we need it to make a move now type thing. I think if they do, they'll take their time, maybe explore some options. And if the right opportunity is there, then they would take it, I think. But I don't see them really prioritizing like, oh yeah, we need to make a trade now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the mindset it's going to be.
Yeah, I think they're comfortable with their group, right or wrong. But I think that they will explore ways that they can enhance it.
Yeah, I think when they went out and they were really aggressive right as free agency opened, they went and they signed some players. I think if they look at the group as is, they know that that's a group that they can kind of get by with and is, that's a good roster. But, there's definitely still things that they could address. But if they choose not to, I wouldn't really be surprised by that either. I think it's a very, if the right opportunity is there and they find somebody that they can work into a trade package and the right person for this team is available that they can make a deal for, then I think it does happen. But I think it really could go either way. I don't think, and it's not even seeming like they're in that mindset of, yeah, we need to do this and we need to make a trade. But I think they are set up now where they can if they choose to.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's going to be exciting. I think like it's going to be really fun to go back to a regular, normal NHL season, which we haven't been able to say for a couple of years with all of this craziness that's been going on. So I think everybody's going to be excited for that and just, just everything seeming back to normal. But the Seattle Kraken are going to be fun to watch. I think they put together a pretty decent roster over there.
Yeah, they made some perplexing moves. I have no idea who's going to score for them. Like Jordan Everly might be their top scorer. I have no idea what they're planning on doing.
That is true.
But a lot of very compelling additions. Like I really like Yanni Gord. I like Callie Yarncroc, the two centers that they added. I don't know how they're going to be in probably more advanced roles. But I don't know. They have a ton of cap space too. Like they might not be great this year, but I think they are setting themselves up to, in the not too distant future, be something of a wagon. Like they're going to be able to, when they have a guy or two that they have their eye on, I think they're going to be able to price out some other teams.
Yeah, and I'm not really picking them to be like a playoff team this season. I think I think they'll be interesting to watch and a super intriguing roster that they put together, but I do think that they still need some more to be able to compete with a lot of these other good teams. But I do think they have the potential to be really, really good in the next couple of years based on like the foundation that they set right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that they were very wise to not eat up a bunch of their cap space. They did have the green light to spend up to the cap. They didn't even come close to it, which I think, if you're given that clean slate, the last thing you want to do is start tying yourself to bad contracts. And I think the temptation is always there to try and go for like a Matt Duchene type, or even Adam Henrique is another example. But they went with the wise moves. They didn't take on other GM's mistakes. And so I think they had a very wise approach to it all.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm excited to just watch them and see how they do and everything. It's always exciting when you have a brand new team like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that they made some intriguing moves for sure. So it should be fun. Should be a good season. I am excited to see if the Bruins do anything, make any other moves before the season starts. I think that's going to be interesting just to see how they go about that now that they have the opportunity to do that with the guys that they signed and everything else. And I think this is going to be a good year. I'm just hoping that maybe this is their year and that they can make that run, because I'm fingers crossed for that. It's well overdue.
They have a lot of versatility now. So I think people will probably sleep on the Bruins. But the way I always look at it is I see what people elsewhere around the NHL and around the country think about the Bruins and everyone else, because your judgment's obviously going to get clouded listening to people around here who you're always going to be most cynical about, the team you cover, or the team that you're a fan of, or whatever. But I think the general consensus around the NHL is the Bruins are still a tough team. I think that I say the Bruins might surprise some people. They're a playoff team. Like they're still a playoff caliber team.
Yeah, people know that, and people are going to acknowledge that this is a good, talented team that is a playoff team. It's just a matter of, can they get over that hump finally? And we'll see how they go about the rest of the off season and even into the season. We'll see how everything pans out too, because I think there's a lot of directions they can go in now with the flexibility they have, like we were mentioning before. Yeah. So that's going to be really interesting to see, but I appreciate you joining me on the show. This was great. Everybody definitely check out Logan's content. He does a really good job. Follow him on Twitter. He's always posting a lot of his articles on there and just doing really good Bruins analysis. So definitely recommend checking him out. And as always, I appreciate everybody tuning into the show every week. I always appreciate the support. So hope everyone has a great rest of the week, and I will talk to you all next time.